Our second scripture reading is from the Gospel of Luke. Jesus has been out and about, and Luke writes, "Soon afterwards he went on through cities and villages, proclaiming and bringing the good news of the kingdom of God. The 12 were with him, as well as some women who had been cured of evil spirits and infirmities. Mary called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Herod's steward, Chuza, and Susanna, and many others who provided for them out of their resources. When a great crowd gathered and people from town after town came to him, he said in a parable, 'A sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell on the earth and was trampled on, and the birds of the air ate it up. Some fell on the rock, and as it grew up, it withered for lack of moisture. Some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew with it and choked it. Some fell into good soil, and when it grew, it produced 100-fold. As he said this, he called out, 'Let anyone with ears to hear listen.'" This is the word of the Lord. You can check back into your bulletin. It's not a misprint. It's not about the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus talked about blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the meek, you are the salt of the earth, and you've heard it said, don't be anxious about tomorrow. This is a sermon on the amount. So I want to deal right from the beginning and give you some amounts, some numbers about what's going on here at Westminster Presbyterian Church. Our confirmation class will have nearly 20 young people in it this year. Our youth groups, Veritas and Jam, have nearly 100 young people on Wednesday nights, plus the 100 or so children and families and other adults who are eating dinner in the fellowship hall downstairs on Wednesday nights. We serve over 400 children a day through our nursery school, child development center, and Children's Day In programs. Close to 500 people use The Rock, our recreation and outreach ministry, each week. When you add it all up, and I got numbers from other places, other people, all the things that are going on, because if you only come to a worship service on a Sunday morning, there is so much happening during the week, 7 days a week here in this place. Somewhere between 3,000 to 3,500 people come through the doors of this church each week, touched in one way or another by what we are, who we are at Westminster Presbyterian Church. And there's no way to figure the amount of people who are helped by what goes out these doors. Shem and Homewood and World Vision and Produce to People and Rise to Hunger, the Blood Drive, India, Malawi, throughout the world by our support of Presbyterian missions. An untold number of people outside the doors of Westminster Presbyterian Church, and yet they're numbers that are real people. They count. And I say we don't know. Last week we heard from Pastor Evans of La Croix New Testament Mission in Haiti. And speaking with Pastor Pierre and Pastor Evans, they told me that there are a little over 4,000 students in all the schools that they support, that they have as part of their mission, to which we give financial support. That's an amount. Now this title is not original with me. Most people think that it was first used by the late Ernest Campbell, great preacher of Riverside Church in New York City back in the early 70s. But I hope it caught your attention this stewardship season, because we do focus on the amount. We want vital programs. We want to make a difference. We want to meet the needs of families and friends and those in need through the ministries and missions of this great church. And so we plan for that. After several months of planning, our commissions have given an amount of what we think it will cost for us to fulfill our church's mission in 2020. And the amount for that preliminary budget is $2,259,500. That's an amount. Is it a too large amount? Is it a too little amount? Is it a Goldilocks amount, just right? That's up to you to decide. There are going to be decreases in some areas of ministry in 2020 that are planned for. There are also some increases, and we're going to be sending out a letter that has those figures for you to see. And I will tell you now, the largest increase is in the outreach and mission budget, that we can return to our traditional historic levels. That's the amount. That's what we're asking for. But if our giving doesn't reach that amount, we will adjust accordingly for a balanced budget. Now, if you're expecting me to give you an amount for you to give to make it all happen, I would love to do that. But I can't. I think of the teenager going to his father on Friday afternoon, "Dad, could you give me $50 for the weekend?" And Dad replies, "$40? Why do you need 30? Here's 20. I can't tell you the exact amount to give. That's your choice. But I know from what the Bible teaches, I can tell you that it should have the word generous in front of it. Look back at our gospel lesson. We're very familiar with Jesus' parable of the sower. So that's why I want to call your attention to that little piece that came right before Luke told that story, or Jesus told the parable. Jesus is going about the countryside doing what Jesus does, and Luke gives us a list of the people with him. Of course, they're the disciples. And then he names by name, he calls out by name those women. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, who is the wife of Pilate's chief of staff. There's Susanna. But what caught me was that last line where Luke says they provided for Jesus' ministry out of their resources. Luke actually names names for the stewardship list. Now, if we were really a biblical church, should we do that for our stewardship list? I'm not suggesting that. But I think it's important to note this list, because after naming those who provided for the resources of Jesus' ministry, Luke has the story of Jesus' parable of the sower and the seeds. What I think Luke is doing here is saying, here's how Jesus' ministry got funded. And Luke wants his gospel listeners to think about, to pray about, to make their commitment to provide the resources for the seeds to be planted to grow the church that is hearing this gospel story from Luke. Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, uses this imagery from Jesus' story to sow the seeds, to give from your resources so Jesus can go about doing what Jesus is supposed to do through the church. He's telling the Christians in Corinth, you have a choice. You make up your mind as to the amount you will give to support the mission of the church. First of all, the giving, the offering we give is a matter of choice. Paul tells us that God is seeking a willing response when the heart, our passion, and the head, our intelligence, catch the power of providing for God's glory and goodness. The result of it all, as Paul describes it, should bring great joy to the one who gives. And I'm sure you've always heard, give until it hurts. Well, that is not biblical. The biblical teaching from Paul is you go past where it hurts and give until it feels good. That's what I'm telling you. That's your choice, to give until it feels good. And second, our choice is a matter of character. Paul talks about those with a generous heart. Just look at how many times he uses the word generous in this passage. Jesus said that where your heart is, there will your treasure be also. I remember a teenage boy. It was early February. I saw him in the hall, very despondent looking. I asked him what the problem was. He said he had just broken up with his girlfriend. And in a very heartbroken voice, I gave her the best. And he counts out September through January. I gave her the best 5 months of my life. Come to find out, he had given her a bottle of perfume for Christmas and had just bought a heart-shaped locket he was going to give her for Valentine's. And I suspect he was more upset about the money he had spent than the girlfriend he lost, because the Sunday after Valentine's, there he was with another girl who happened to have on a heart-shaped locket. Heart and treasure are always connected. And when we're confronted with a choice about what we give, I've discovered, I think, that there are basically three heart conditions that lead us to choosing an amount. There is the miserly heart, very utilitarian, very self-focused. The miserly heart, in one hand, looks at giving to the church in terms of its tax benefit. And recent studies show there's been nearly a 2% decrease in charitable giving after the new tax plan went into effect. The miserly heart condition looks to its own desires and neglects the needs of others, to spend less in other places except what's important to fulfill that miserly heart's own particular personal point of view. It forgets that we're in this together, that there's a spiritual dimension that inspires and encourages, that the spire of this church is a visible reminder of who we are, of whose we are, and that fellowship is crucial for the work of the kingdom. In your character and mine, there should be a sense of what is beautiful and good for everyone that overcomes the miserly heart. And we struggle with what I call the condition of the market heart. So much of our living is judged by the market heart that looks only at the bottom line. And that market heart looks at home life in terms of the cost of living rather than the purpose of living. And Jesus warned us about that. What shall it profit you if you gain the world and lose your soul? Some look at the church with a market heart that believes the church has a product to sell and thinks only in terms of the profit, P-R-O-F-I-T, and neglects the mission of the church that is for profit, P-R-O-P-H-E-T. As my colleague Louise Rogers has said, people giving to further the good works of God's kingdom through the church. In the church, there is the reality of the miserly heart and the market heart, but thank God there is also, I had to go to my thesaurus to find a third M. There's also the munificent heart, those with generous hearts. Munificence, according to the dictionary, means liberal in giving, lavish, great liberality of generosity, exactly the kind of people Paul is talking about. The kind of people who reflect the mind of God. The people of the generous heart are people like you and me who know we belong to a munificent God. Our generosity is and should be shaped by the generosity of God, who has given us the gift of life, the realities of hope, the love of family, the care of friends. There's a spiritual math involved here, and it uses real numbers of our real lives with our real resources. I knew a young businessman, very, very successful businessman, who had a nearly fatal heart attack. And one day after his recovery, he came by my office. He pulled out his checkbook to make a contribution to one of our church's special missions fund. And I didn't want to see it, what he was giving. He said, I'm not filling out the amount. I'll give that to the business manager when I give her the check. I just want to show you what I've learned. See that line down there on the check where it says for? Every time now that I write a check to the church, and I'm going to do it more often than I ever have before, I will write down on that line what I need always to remember. And then he wrote out, thank God. He learned something that we all need to learn. The amount we give to God comes after we remember to thank God, after we add up the amount of our commitment, the amount of our joy to give 100% of ourselves. That's the spiritual math that will give you an amount. And it is because of the generosity of God that this church has done all the great things that it has accomplished. It is doing great things now. and will be doing great things in the future. So I come to the end of the sermon, and I'm going to ask you to write your own Sermon on the Mount with God alone as your congregation. Just as Jesus' Sermon on the Mount spoke of the blessings, what blessings does God receive from your Sermon on the Mount? To God be the glory.